just go to any war memorial and look at how many gravestones there are and ask yourself who is under the ground there. It's going to be men and boys. Or like ask yourself what skeletons are inside the Great Wall of China, and they're going to be immigrant Chinese men. Who built the railroads across America? That would be men. How many people died? It would be men. And like even just right now, the way we talk about issues in a gendered way is almost always centered around women, even issues that disproportionately don't impact women as much as men.
Welcome to another episode of the Art of Success podcast, and today's guest is George from TheTinMen. With a mission to broaden our horizons on the male experience, George fearlessly dives into uncomfortable conversations and unearths the raw truths often left unspoken. Through his platform, TheTinMen, he sheds light on the lesser explored aspects of gender equality, focusing on men's health and the often overlooked side of the equation. What I particularly appreciate about George's opinions are his nuanced approach with the amount of clear forethought. We're going to cover some topics like what you don't know about male suicide, why therapy for men doesn't always work, the gender pay gap, why it's so uncomfortable to have this kind of conversations, and the education crisis that boys find themselves in. So enjoy. When I was planning this conversation, I was aware of the fact that I was kind of walking on eggshells. I felt like I was on treacherous ground, and I felt like I was kind of in danger of, I don't know what, but it felt sketchy. Like, why do you think that is?
I mean, there's a lot of different issues. I mean, I agree. I totally mirror your feelings. I mean, I've lost friends. I've had family members walk out the room like in protest. You get the classic angry DMs all the time. I just think lots of reasons. People associate men's rights with things such as like the alt-right, white supremacy, being a Nazi. That's the sort of area men's rights advocacy is placed alongside. I remember sitting with a bunch of friends years ago, and they were talking about like Brexiteers and Tories, and which I'm not a Brexiteer or a Tory, and everyone was saying how much they hate them. And then one woman came in, worst of all, men's rights activists. And I did my normal thing. I was like, men's rights activists, and just spit on the floor. Gross. Oh, I can't believe it. What do they want? Human rights. Gross. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, yeah, human rights. I hate human rights. And obviously being sarcastic. But I don't honestly know. There's been an extremely effective smear campaign against men's human rights to the point where you can't even call yourself an MRA without being sneered at. So there's been a massive stand-up campaign. People have bought into this idea that men are ubiquitously privileged in every single area in the world. Like every single area, every single place, in all types and industries, men are advantaged, ubiquitous advantage. And it's like, there are certainly advantages to being a man, but there are also disadvantages too. But people aren't willing to sort of see it with that sort of nuance. And we've bought into this very blanket statement of male privilege. So anyone who wants to advocate for male privilege, it's seen as, again, in line with White Lives Matter. I always get told, like, you sound like a White Lives Matter. And I'm like, not really, because being white is an advantage in more or less every single way you could think of. But being a man isn't. And like being white isn't the same as being a man. And being black isn't the same as being a woman. And yet we seem to think it is when it clearly isn't. And it's not the same now. And it certainly wasn't the same historically. So people seem to think that talking about men and boys in a positive light is comparable to being a white supremacist. So I guess that's why you feel like you're walking on eggshells, when in fact it isn't. Like even issues that overwhelmingly impact men, such as suicide, people even find that difficult to talk about. I remember when I was working with a male suicide charity at the very beginning, told my sister about, this is a male suicide charity, really good. And she was like, why does it have to be men though? Why does it have to, can't it just be suicide? And I was like, it's men because 3/4 to 4/5 of suicides are men. That's why. And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. But I haven't got an answer to your question. If I would love one. That's like $1 million question. I feel like there is a biological part of us that just care less about men, especially their safety, or less about men than we do about women. I feel like that sort of disparity has been exploited by some people in the political space to basically deny what's happening to men completely and deprive men and boys of compassion and sort of awareness and advocacy. But a lot of people.
Do you think this is something that's always been around, or is it new, or is it something that's been exaggerated in recent times?
Well, male disposability are we talking about in terms of?
Yeah.
No, male disposability. I mean, the whole world is built upon male disposability. Like male disposability meaning how men are sort of seen as more disposable, their lives not worth saving in the same way as a women. I guess in the literal sense, it's the women and children first. Like the boat hits the iceberg, women and children first. The men can go fuck themselves. And I feel like that's been around for a long, long time. Like just go to any war memorial and look at how many gravestones there are and ask yourself who is under the ground there. It's going to be men and boys. Or like ask yourself what skeletons are inside the Great Wall of China, and they're going to be immigrant Chinese men. Who built the railroads across America? That would be men. How many people died? It would be men. And like even just right now, the way we talk about issues in a gendered way is almost always centered around women, even issues that disproportionately don't impact women as much as we were having a conversation online yesterday about violence against women, Vogue, and I was asking, like, if the issue is violent crime, statistically, men and boys are the primary victim of pretty much every single violent crime, apart from sexual violence. So why, if men and boys are the primary victim of violent crime, are they the ones that are secondary? Why is it centered on the people? Why is it centered on the people least at risk and like the most at risk of violent crime? And I know this very well, being a Londoner. Young black boys living in the city, working class families, often single parent households. That's the biggest at risk group of violent crime, and yet boys and men are almost never mentioned in anti-violence campaigning. So the idea of male disposability has been around for a long time, and it's still with us today. I can obviously give you more examples about how we erase men and boys from the conversation, but as a Londoner,
let's loop around to that, because like one thing I wanted to explore is like when did it become kind of nebulous, or when did the area between the far right and men's rights and boys' rights become this kind of nebulous mess? Like when did that happen? Was there a crossover?
Well, in terms of what men and boys advocacy being conflated with the far right?
Yeah.
When did that happen? All the time. Like it's been seen, men and boys advocacy has been seen as a dirty word for at least 50 years. I did a podcast with someone called Erin Pitsey, who she is, in my opinion, a national treasure. Erin Pitsey became famous around the world 50 years ago when she opened the first refuge in the world for women and girls. The first domestic abuse refuge was opened by someone called Erin Pitsey. And her learnings were that domestic violence isn't a gendered issue. It's a sort of a cycle of violence that comes from childhood and families, and it's generational. And men are at risk too. Men are at risk of violence just like women are. So she decided to, as well as advocate for women's safety, also to advocate for men and to open a refuge for men and boys. And that's where she went from national hero to a national disgrace. And she got picketed, harassed, got like death threats, bomb threats, like a huge amount of backlash against her. She was no longer seen as this hero for women, and she became like basically a black mark of women's rights. And so that was 1975. So for at least since then, just talking about men and boys in any sort of compassionate way is kind of gross to a lot of people. So gross that you're willing to threaten someone who has saved thousands of women's and girls' lives. So when did Emma, being a men's rights activist, of which I don't consider myself, when did that become conflated and mixed in with being basically a piece of shit? At least 50 years ago, potentially more. Like I've always been interested into where this anti-male sort of mindset comes from, and I've yet to find the source. And I'm sure, like all things, there's a multitude of sources across a wide variety of time. But I'm afraid.
So what have been the knock-on effects of that? Like obviously, like it's. Well, I think you've got so many facts, so many points and like kind of observations that you can make. Like what have been the knock-on effects of that 50-year plus journey?
The knock-on effects of what it's like to talking about men and boys in this space?
The knock-on effects of men and boys' rights being kind of...
Well, specifically in the Erin Pitsey space. So she was obviously a huge campaigner against domestic violence, opened the first refuge, wrote the first book, took domestic violence out from behind closed doors and made it a societal criminal matter. The impact of her being ostracized for talking about men and boys is the fact that nothing has changed. And that's a direct quote from her. I actually would consider myself a friend. And she said, nothing has changed. We still don't support men who are being abused. We still don't give them shelter. We don't really look at them with any sort of compassion. The way we see domestic violence is seen as something that men do to women as an act of patriarchal control. And nothing has really changed. The people that took over her charity are still there today. And they're now the biggest domestic violence organization in the world. And they still run under this exact same philosophy of it's a gendered issue. Men and boys aren't really impacted and men and boys aren't deserving of help. So specifically in domestic violence, nothing has changed since Erin Pizzey's time. And I would say not much has changed elsewhere either. It's kind of a dour space to be in. It's kind of quite a pessimistic space. And it's just
so how are men affected currently in terms of domestic violence?
Well, in the UK, there's 2.9 million men who have been abused in their lifetime. I think it's 5.9 million women. So 3 million and 6 million. So two to one, basically. 1 in 3 victims of abuse in the UK is a man. There's arguments that it's higher than that because the way we collect data is based on police reports, and because men are less likely to report to the police, they're less likely to be capturing that data. But even going by the conservative estimate of 2.9 million men, it's a huge issue considering there is no support for those men. There's a handful of spaces in refuges for men in the UK and nothing else. And the reason why I find it interesting is that domestic violence is obviously especially domestic violence against men, it's a very difficult to talk about subject, very politically unpopular. That's where the death threats come. And the annoying thing is that experiences of domestic abuse and violence are a very central cause of male suicide. I think it's 11% of men who are in abusive relationships attempt suicide. So if you look at 2.9 million men and consider perhaps 11% of them are going to attempt suicide, you can see how it's a massive, massive issue, and it's leaving a lot of men vulnerable, not only to the abuse itself, but to the indirect consequences of that abuse. And it's frustrating because it exposes a real double standard within male suicide advocacy. A lot of people want to talk about male suicide, including myself, because it's an important issue, and rightly so. Like 5,000 men lose their lives to suicide every year in the UK. But no one wants to talk about male victims of abuse, even though experiences of abuse are a massive cause of suicide and suicide attempts. So I always encourage people to do the dirty work. Don't just talk about male suicide. Certainly do that. It's useful. But ask yourself what is shaping abusive sort of suicidality in men. And it's not just domestic violence. It's lots of different things. But what causes abuse is the dirty
what
word.
What are the other very what are the other dirty words in this conversation? Like, where's the I'm sure there's many. What are the things that are frowned upon?
If I wanted to get us cancelled ASAP, what would I talk about?
Yeah. This is an objective to cancel.
Sexual violence against men. In the UK, it's legally impossible for a woman to rape a man. That's still a matter of law. So in the eyes of the law, there is nothing a woman can do to a man in the UK that would ever constitute as rape. To be a rapist, legally speaking and academically, you have to have a penis. So cis women can't do it. That's pretty controversial. Another one is false allegations are obviously very difficult to talk about. I try not to talk about it. I'm very excited to watch the Johnny Depp Amber Heard documentary on Netflix coming out today. And that raised up the profile of false allegations and the damage it can do. Even when someone's found to be innocent in court, Johnny Depp's reputation is still destroyed in the court of public opinion. That's controversial. What else do you want? Paternity fraud, very controversial. Paternity fraud is where a man is basically raising a child he thinks is his but isn't. And it's estimated about 1 in 25 men are in that position in America. So 1 in 25 fathers are raising a child in America they think is theirs but isn't. That's controversial. And a lot of the time, even if that man finds out the child isn't his, he still has to keep paying child support. So he's now paying child support for another man's child. That's controversial. And then obviously just the basic stuff like men, lower life expectancy in every single country in the world, higher mortality rates in every single age group in the UK, leading in about 11 of the top 15 causes of death in America. Really, basically, there's a Professor Randolph Neese, who is the founder of evolutionary biology, I believe, he said, being a man is the biggest predictor of early death now. Being a man, just that is the biggest risk factor. Forget about obesity, forget about smoking, forget about being old, forget about just being a man now. And he said, if we can make male and female mortality rates the same, we'd do more good than curing cancer. And that is controversial. I mean, everything is controversial. Showing any hint of compassion for men is in some way, to a lot of people, controversial, and it needn't be. And it's important to remind people that this isn't a matter of either or. Everything people believe and support for women's rights, I believe too. I consider myself left-wing, I consider myself progressive and pro-choice and the rest of it. I believe all that, but I'm adding these opinions. I'm adding to the conversation. I'm not saying either or, men or women. I'm saying it is still about women, but can we please add men? I'm not trying to wave away I'm not trying to wave away women who are being abused. I'm saying they exist and they deserve support, but also there are 2.9 million men as well. So it is controversial in the ways I described, but it really needn't be, because we're just basically expanding the same compassion and ideas to both men and women, and just being consistent, really.
It stuns me that compassion is something that can get you in trouble.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just the word man. If I take the same stat, when I said earlier, men are 1 in 3 victims of domestic abuse and they don't get any support anywhere in the UK. If I just take the word man out of that, and if I just said 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence in the UK are barred from refuges, people are outraged, and rightly so. But it's only when you say that 1 in 3 is men that people are less outraged and actually annoyed. Are you trying to catch them out? If I were to say there is a group of people that are behind at every single stage of education, at every single age group, in virtually every single Western country, people would want to know who that group is. And if I said that group is boys, which it is, people are really confused and pissed off. They feel they're caught in a sense of cognitive dissonance, where you sort of trick them into being compassionate by saying that boys are behind at every single stage of education in every single Western country. But you're taking out the stigmatizing word boys. And I don't get it.
Is so much of this just the kind of the sunk cost of having kind of narrativized the world to go, okay, this is the narrative, this is the simple way to think about it, and it's very clear what is right and wrong for me to believe and do and say in this world. And then as soon as you have that cognitive dissonance, it is uncomfortable. Is it like undermining to the individual?
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, especially when people badge themselves so ardently and explicitly with their political opinions. And like people will like quite literally will buy the t-shirt. Like they'll buy, this is what a feminist looks like, or smash the patriarchy, XYZ. And people are publicly badging themselves with their political opinions, not just in real life, but on social media especially. And if a piece of information comes along in the way that I present it, that maybe challenges that point of view, it's not just a challenge to the idea, it's a challenge to the person themselves and their identity. And they sort of experience an identity crisis, like an existential crisis of not quite knowing who they are. Their identity has been taken away or been threatened. And some people are willing to go through that, and they come out actually quite grateful for having had their mind changed or sort of twisted a little bit. And they message me too, but some people can't go through that, and they can't grab the nettle, and it's too much, and it's too much of a threat, and they're just a bit too thin-skinned, and they're the ones that get all outraged and start using silly words. But the problem is
that craving for certainty, dude, is a real fucker.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I want to believe.
That's what I think. I was thinking the issue is absolutism. Like people seem to think that there is an absolute answer to every single question, and it's a one-word answer, simple hashtagable answers to really extraordinarily complex problems. And that absolutist thinking is what's the problem. And that happens not just within the feminist movement, but within the men's rights movement as well. I see the exact same dramatic worldviews from both sides. Like I am certain I have plenty of criticism for the men's rights movement. I think it's interesting how similar it is to the feminist movement that they claim to hate. And the issue is neither
What's the
side.
criticism you get from the men's side of this equation?
I get called a feminist sympathizer and an incel.
For what?
I don't know. Honestly, if you're trying to get me to give reason and rationale to these crazy people online, then I don't think that's something I can provide. But a lot of the time, people think I cater to feminist thinking too much, but then I also get called an anti-feminist incel. So I don't really know. Everyone seems to have their own opinion, but the fact that I'm getting attacked by both sides is, I take that more as a compliment than anything.
Yeah.
Like Maggie Thatcher, who I'm not really a big fan of at all, but I do like the quote. She said, "If you walk down the middle of the road, you get hit by both sides." And that's me. I tried to walk down the middle, the moderate, sort of the centre, left-leaning opinion, and you just get mashed up by everyone. But the criticisms are always different. A lot of people, the big issue I find is a lot of people seeing the word feminism and the word women as being the same thing. So if I ever scrutinize feminism, then people see that as an attack against women, but they're not. It's not even a little bit. Like, feminism is a distinct political movement, and women as a group of people. Like, any political movement is deserving of scrutiny, but women as a group are not deserving of scrutiny. Like, it's a huge, diverse, broad church of people, and that's, I think, at the center of why I get criticism, because people mix the two up. A lot of people in the men's rights movement want to criticize women when really they're talking about feminism. And a lot of people on the left in the feminist movement think I'm attacking women because I talk about feminism. And I feel like we just need to draw a big, thick line between women and feminism. And I think that will help diffuse a lot of the outrage I often get from both sides.
You've been speaking about the criticism, and obviously, like, part of that criticism is the personal cost of having a nuanced opinion, to put it one way. But, like, there must have been a tipping point where you went, right, fuck it, I'm going to say something about this. I'm going to make my view on this more public. What was happening around that time? Like, what kind of led you to that point where I'm going to make a public opinion of this?
I guess there are lots of tipping points. As like I mentioned, I live in London, and a lot of the people I hang out with are self-described progressive liberals. Although I would argue they're not very liberal and they're not very progressive. But I would be in these spaces and I would just hear things that just did not make sense. I was friends with someone who was a part of a large feminist organization as all against violence against women, as we've talked about. And then I'd be like, but why? Like, I'd go away and I'd bring back statistics and be like, 80% of homicide victims are men. Like, should they not be included in the conversation? Like, why are we, if 4 in 5 murder victims are men? Surely the issue is violent crime, not violence against women, or violence against women and violence against men, whatever you want. But men need to be part of that conversation too. And men and boys issues needs to be seen in a way that is more than just encouraging men to cry and boys to talk. And that's all it seems to be. And I was like, there's a lot more to this area than is being discussed. I feel like it's been downplayed, watered down a lot. And I only started my page because I wanted to have essentially a library of reliable facts and information, such as 81% of homicide victims worldwide are men, according to the UN. I just wanted that as a little square on my phone on an Instagram page, a private Instagram page for my own benefit. And I would have it beneath a table in a very literal sense. And then people just started following me. And also people just said, go make your own page. I would be engaging in the comment sections of other people. And they'd be like, this isn't about you. This isn't about men. If you want to start a space for men and boys, go do it. You go do that. And I was like, all right, I can do that. And I will do that. And I wanted it to be the best of its kind, if possible. I wanted to make it as good as it can be. There are so few places to talk about these issues. I wanted one of the few that existed to be really good, and that is TheTinMen, I hope. So I did it because I saw a gap in the market. I was told to do it. And I just think that there were certain points in time where I was just like, this isn't right. And I couldn't believe it. Like over lockdown, for example, one of those points is over lockdown. I worked closely with NHS to help advise them on how to support and protect at-risk groups to COVID-19. So the two groups I was working with were Black communities and South Asian populations, which are at-risk groups. But so are men. And from my own research through TheTinMen, I was like, I know the male sex is vulnerable. I think it's 3 times more vulnerable to infectious diseases. And there was no mention of them whatsoever in any of the targeted care for COVID-19 that I was leading. And I could see it in the research, even the research I was being given by the client. I was like, the male sex is a vulnerable. I was like, why are we not protecting all vulnerable groups? I'm sorry if you have a hard time hearing men as a vulnerable group, but the stats are clear. Like male deaths from COVID-19 are 1.6 times higher than women's. It's not a marginal change. And stuff like that, I was just like, this doesn't make sense. The stats are there. Why are people
How's that met?
wanting to go with what's popular over what is correct? Like, I get it. Saying men are vulnerable in any capacity is very unpopular, but it doesn't mean it's wrong, and it's not wrong. So that was the case. Again, I saw George Floyd. When George Floyd was killed, police brutality has always been an issue I talk about because it's an issue that overwhelmingly impacts men. Like 96% of Americans killed by police are men. If you were to line up all the black Americans killed by police in 2020, including George Floyd, more than 99% of those black people are black men. And I just don't understand why gender was never made part of that debate. Like, police brutality is a racial issue for sure. So too is it a gender issue, but no one talked about the gender side of it.
Just a quick favour to ask, my friends. If you could head to wherever you listen to this podcast and leave a very kind review, that will not only help my ego virtually explode, but it will help people just like you find the podcast too, and hopefully help them to their next level.
And then I remember a year after that, Sarah Everard was killed, which is an awful tragedy. And then the same people that were advocating against police brutality were jumping on the bandwagon, talking about male violence, how dangerous men are, how scary it is to be a woman at nighttime, and how men are inherently violent. And then I was just like, you're just creating the exact cultural panic that fed into the killing of George Floyd, where we see black men as inherently dangerous. And if a police officer feels that he kills him, dead. And I was like, you're feeding into the exact culture of seeing men as inherently dangerous that causes police brutality. And it's the same people saying both things. It's just a year later. And I just thought there was a big gap in the market for some original thinking. And I had some spare time because of COVID, because obviously I'm a filmmaker. There wasn't much going on. And there's so many points of hypocrisy that spurred me on. I'm not short of motivations, put it that way.
Yeah. But, when you were speaking to the NHS and when you're saying, like, these are the stats around men's susceptibility to infectious diseases, like, what was that? How was that met? Like, what was the repose for
that? It's always apathy. You won't get outrage because it's in a professional space and they are the NHS. But apathy, it's always apathy. That's the best you can hope for. If it's not outrage, it's apathy. And that's what I got. They don't care. They don't know.
But that just means that they're not listening.
Yeah. But the fact is, men are 3 times more likely to go to intensive care if they get COVID-19. And that is crazy. That is significantly higher than any other at-risk group that I know of. And yet nothing was said and done. And that is a biological vulnerability. That isn't down to sort of men's behavior necessarily. It's biological because men have testosterone, which has a dampening effect on the immune system. Mm-hmm. And they also have an XY chromosome, which does the same thing. It leaves men more vulnerable to infectious diseases. That was true. That's always been true. It was true for COVID-19. It's true today. Very few people know that. And a part of it's because people that did know didn't say anything. And that one of those people was me. I was on that campaign and there was no funding to talk about men as an at-risk group in really any capacity that I know of. All the charities I know that work with vulnerable men, especially mental health, they are working on shoestring budgets. Like the funding that goes to men who are vulnerable to domestic violence is pretty much zero. Maybe 1% of funding goes to male domestic abuse charities, but almost all of it goes to women. And I don't know. There's just a sense of apathy where people don't want to talk about it, don't want to hear about it, and they find it personally offensive.
Yeah. So one of the things you spoke about there, you touched on Sarah Everard and the fallout from that, and linked to that was one of the posts on your page, and it was like, what are the things that women will never understand about being men from a men's perspective, or from male perspective? And one of the things that I was just like, I almost like out loud, and yes, it's like walking along the street and having to like cough, scrape your shoes, make noise to like signal I'm not a threat. And like, and that's just something that just like, I don't think it gets that much attention.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a controversial thing, but I mean, I want to start by saying that everyone, man or woman, has every right to look after their personal safety and be mindful of what makes them comfortable. And if there's anything we can do as a society, if that means crossing the street or throwing a little cough to make women and men feel more safe, that is absolutely something we should do and be mindful of. Mm. But there's a difference between those basic common sense, common decency decisions, and then what is also happening, which is just a massive creation, like a massive cultural panic around men. Like the idea that just seeing a man is dangerous. Like I saw one, it was like, oh, well, you say not all men, but think about this, that if I take one bullet, put it into a revolver and spin the barrel and point it at you, you're not going to say not all bullets. And it's just like, the chance of meeting a man is not a 1 in 6 chance of death. Like, come on, like that is not advocacy by any means. And you see these posts about men being rabid dogs or ticks, or meeting a man is like eating from a bowl full of sweets and 99% of the sweets are great, one of them's covered in shit. And it's like, I don't really think that's very helpful. I don't think that makes men feel pretty good. I don't think it makes women feel safe either. It creates a divide. It doesn't even solve the problem. It doesn't actually solve the problem of crime. There's no one on Instagram who's an actual threat to women reading that and being like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, best retire my career being a violent criminal. So I've actually forgotten your questions now. I've rambled too long. Where did we start with this one? It was me making a point and not asking an actual question, which is my style of podcasting. Wow. So I just ramble. So to carry on me making a point and then just expecting you to carry on the conversation without me contributing to it. One of the things that really grabbed me emotionally when you're talking to Chris Williamson, which is what inspired me to reach out to you, was the idea of fathers giving up their child and what that does to an individual. Yeah. I mean, I know I've talked about it in terms of my own personal experience of my own family. Both my parents are very successful professionals. Both work in academia. So I don't want to give the idea that my mum is some sort of handmaiden. She certainly isn't. I'd say she's like the matriarch of the family. But when my sister and I were born, I know she spent time off to raise us, and her sacrifice was career. For those few years, she didn't work part-time, and like that's going to have an impact on her pay, her salary, her career, of course, and that's where the pay gap comes from, and we can come back to that. But my mum absolutely made sacrifices for me and my sister, and my sister would often remind me of that. She's like, you didn't realize how much mum sacrificed, and I'm like, I don't, because I was a baby, but I know she did a lot. But you don't consider what our dad sacrificed. And then what our dad sacrificed was the opposite, where he just stayed at work. He had no choice either. If he had said, I ain't going to go to work today, and telling you that is, my mum would not allow him to not go to work. He had to go to work. And as a sacrifice of going to work, traveling the world often for like weeks at a time, doing conferences, he didn't get to see his family. So his sacrifice was the opposite, where he spent all the time at work, no time with his family. And the gap that he experienced was a gap of like connection between his family and him. And also just, especially now he's retired, I think he's experiencing a lot more loneliness than my mum, because my mum made a lot of friends through raising her children at like play groups and school, stuff like that, just for the women in the village. And they're still friends to this day. And now they're both retired. She's got lots of friends from the mothers she met. My dad's got very few friends. And he's still paying the price of that sacrifice now. And I don't think we ever really give mums the credit either, but we don't give dads the credit for what they provide to a family, which is obviously a lot of the time like money, paying the mortgage, paying the bills, keeping the lights on, keeping the water running. And I know Chris Rock talked about it. He jokes about how no one ever thanks dad. No one ever thanks dad for, thanks for keeping the light on so I can read this book. He's like, oh, I love all this clean water. No one ever says that. He's like, thanks for paying the rent, dad. It's never that. It's often like, thanks for dinner, mum. Thanks for this and that. And by no means do I think women get enough credit for being mums. They don't. But I don't think dads are either. And I wish we were. And I think we should value the sacrifice they made. I feel like dads should have more parental leave. I feel like it'd be a benefit to both women and men. And I fundamentally feel like fathers deserve equal rights to mothers, which they don't have. And I'm tired of hearing talk of fathers not taking equal responsibility. And I'm like, equal responsibility starts with equal rights. And fathers don't have equal rights. So how could you ask a father to be equally responsible when he doesn't even have equal rights? Like, both those things need to change at the same time. And fathers don't have equal rights. They don't have equal paternity leave. And they don't have equal access to their children. So there's a lot being left out on the parenting discussion, I think.
And then you have the side of the conversation that evolves when family units break up too. Like, what's the effect on men and women at that point?
Bad. Like, whenever I talk to people always come to me with their talk of power dynamics, and you don't understand the power dynamics, George. And I'm like, probably not. But if you think there is just one power dynamic, you should head down to your local family court and have a look at how powerful those fathers are in keeping their children, which is not very at all. Like, the way it works in the UK is that for a father to have equal rights to his child, he has to either be married or have his name on a birth certificate. And that's it. And both of those things can be decided by the mother. The mother can not marry him and not name him on a birth certificate, and therefore he has no rights to that child. But a mother has equal rights in every single outcome. So married, separated, divorced, single, doesn't matter. Full rights to the mother, not the same for the father. And that's just a basic inequality of actual human rights, like actual rights that men don't have, that women do, based on their gender. And it's not right. It's not right. And especially when we're talking about children, which is probably the most important thing to any parent's life, for them to be deprived of rights that will deprive them of the thing most important to them is a serious issue that no one's talking about. Very few people are talking about it. And the family court system is totally broken. There's a lot of discussion about how private it is or how secret it is and how much oversight there is in family courts. There's certainly a lot to be done. But basically, a lot of fathers are losing their children unfairly. A lot of allegations are being made in family courts that aren't true. Basically, you can totally see how it happens, but if you're facing losing a child as a man or a woman, if you can make an allegation against your partner of childhood abuse, abusing your children, abusing you, if you can do that without any evidence, which you can, then you're going to do it. If it's going to get your child, I can see why people would want to do it. All they have to say is, he abused me, he abused a child, and then the conversation's over. The child's yours. So that system's if there's a system that can be exploited, it will be eventually, and it is. And that's also not even concluding the fact that women or men get legal aid if they make if they make an allegation, lawyers paid for. So a lot of working class families are doing that. And the issue is not in middle class families where a father and a mother can both afford legal representation more or less equally. The issue is in working class families where typically the mother will make an allegation against the dad, and then she'll get legal aid and she'll get custody. So that happens a lot, but it's very difficult to know how often because there's so little transparency in family courts. It's like a bit of like a black box, really, and it's quite scary.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned that I don't want to lose sight of, and just to bring up the percentage chance of us getting cancelled here, talking about gender pay gap.
Oh. Well, it's just like there is a gap. Of course there's a gap. Mm-hmm. But it's like people that work more dangerous jobs get paid more, which is men. People that work longer hours get paid more, which is men. People that work more overtime get paid more, which is men. People that work in higher paid fields more get paid more. And that's men as well. Like, men are paid more, but are they paid more because they are men? I don't think they are. Like, dangerous jobs, longer hours, overtime, traveling to work farther, working in more higher paid fields like engineering, STEM. There's obviously another conversation to have about why don't women work more dangerous jobs, or why don't women work the same amount of hours? A lot of it around childcare, and there's some useful conversations around that. But the conversation starts with women are paid less because of the choices they make. Why they make those choices is a separate conversation, but it's not down to discrimination. And often we talked about it as well, but the big pay gap, the main pay gap, is between mothers and fathers, where mothers take more time off work, they leave their career, they don't get pay rises, they don't even get paid. And if they do return to work, it's either not at all or part-time. And people that work part-time get paid less, whereas the father will go back to work after 2 weeks in the UK. The mum will stay off for a year. The father goes back. He gets paid more. He gets more promotions, as he should, because he's working. So the pay gap is a pay gap more between mothers and fathers than it is between women and men. There is a gap between women and men, but that's more down to the reasons I gave about the type of what jobs they work. But it's just a very low resolution debate we're having on the pay gap, where we just see women are paid less because they're women. And that's not true. Like, if you look at women and men working the same job for the same hours, for the same experience, women are paid 99 cents to the dollar of a man. But if you look at median women versus median men, it's like 80 cents to the dollar. But I'd prefer to use the controlled pay gap, which is 99 cents to the dollar. So it's just people aren't willing to have that discussion. Not everything I've just rambled on for the last 2 minutes won't fit into a tweet. So therefore, it's not interesting to 99% of people.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult subject to discuss, very complicated.
Cool. And that's exactly why I got you on here. It's a high resolution conversation.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the kind of conversations that are obviously so important, but is so unappetizing to a very dopamine driven, quick, sensationalized society.
But it shouldn't be. Like, it's the frustrating thing is, pay gap's a great example of this, where the issues that impact men, which is in this case unequal parental leave, unequal rights to children, impacts women indirectly, because it means they get paid less because they have to take on the burden that men aren't getting. If we were to say men and women get equal parental leave, equal rights, that would create a movement where more fathers take time off work, and therefore more mothers can return to work, and more mothers get paid more, and the gap would close. Like, the issues are symbiotically linked. They're the same issues, two sides of the equation we're talking about, and yet we only talk about one. And you will never close the pay gap unless you give fathers equal time with their children. But people don't want to talk about that. People just want to sort of wave a pitchfork in the air and, placards and scream crap about patriarchies and toxic this and male privilege that. And my sort of voice gets just a bit too boring, right? Unfortunately, just droning on about the detail that no one wants to hear. It's not as interesting as a catchphrase.
Yeah. If you're thinking, so one of the things that I enjoy thinking about, like, what has an outsized return of impact? And if you're thinking about the beliefs at the heart of this discussion that minimize the focus we pay to men and boys, what would you say those kind of the 80-20 belief is? Like, what's this, the one belief that has an outsized effect on the conversation?
What do you mean? What do you mean by belief?
So there's obviously a set of beliefs that are creating either a lack of attention or a kind of a lack of care over the discussion that we're having, the nuance within it right now. So, like, what would you say that the kind of the central beliefs there are, the ones that have the biggest impact here?
I feel like it's a fundamental misunderstanding of men and boys when we assume that men are not emotionally eloquent or aren't able to communicate their feelings. And often when people say that, I mean they don't communicate their feelings like women. Often men don't talk in the same way as women. They don't communicate. They don't express their pain, fear, or distress in the same way as women. And we seem to think that because they're not expressing it in the same way as women, they're not expressing it at all. And I don't think that's true. Like, I've worked directly on studies into suicide, for example, where we've asked men to share their experiences of the most vulnerable times in their life, like sharing stories of being abused, being sexually assaulted or molested as children. Very vulnerable things to share. And we had no end of contributions, whole paragraphs of text from all over the world, thousands and thousands and thousands of men sharing their life story in a way that's so emotionally eloquent and heartbreaking that I was just like, these men are talking. They are talking. They want to talk, and they know how to talk, and they know how to express themselves. And the wisdom they have is just next level. And I was like, these are not the oafish, stoic men I hear described. These are sensitive, vulnerable, intelligent men that are being described as if they're like cavemen that are totally unaware of their feelings. And I'm like, men do know how to talk. I feel like the bigger issue is that we don't know how to listen to them. or we don't care enough to ask at all. So I think men are talking as long as you're willing to listen to how they communicate. But some people are just not open to that. Talking and listening is
yesterday.
Go on.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Monday evening, I had a conversation with the terminology here is obviously linked, fireman, firefighter, about his impact. Like he basically over the weekend is telling me how he'd had one large road traffic collision to deal with that was very difficult, and then a fire that was putting out, and then we got talking about the very difficult times in his career that he kind of dealt with, and we're just sat in the gym with the rest of the class going on, and we'd finish our class and we're chatting there, and I was thinking, like, this is such an eloquent discussion about this. Like, he's verbalizing this and discussing this in such a mature and articulate way that I think you kind of isn't expected for some reason. But like I work with a lot of like high performers, people who are trying to eke out an extra few percentage points in terms of like what they do with their life, and they want to approach that through mindset in broad terms. And the conversations that I have with guys in that space are so articulate. They're so to the point. They're so engaging emotionally, and it's definitely that men don't have this is from my perspective anyway, it's definitely that men don't have the capacity to do so or the skill set to do so. It's more the space and maybe the freedom to do so.
I mean, you cut out for a few seconds there, but maybe if you just rephrase the last 20 seconds of that.
Yeah. So like I was rambling as per ever, but I think that men have that capacity within them. They can certainly build up the skill set to have these kind of conversations, but it's more the space and the option to do so. Yeah.
Like, just even people don't even like men's spaces anymore. Like, people feel like that's inherently toxic and some sort of hotbed for misogyny, when it's like a lot of men just want to meet with other guys. A lot of men want to hear what other guys have got to say. Unfortunately, there's something that men can only really understand about other men. And like, even the most well-intended woman, I don't think will ever have a complete understanding of what it is to be a man. And there's something special about men talking to other men in a men's space without judgment, in a non-clinical space. Yeah. And the same for women. There was something sort of precious about women's spaces, women's groups. And I feel the same way about that. And the sad thing is people seem to think that men's spaces are kind of grubby. And I think one of those spaces is the gym, actually. I feel like that is a bit of a therapy space for a lot of men and women, but mostly men. And we talk a lot about side-by-side time or shoulder-to-shoulder time. By that, I mean, there is a movement within the psychological industry that is suggesting that in a therapeutic environment, men benefit less from face-to-face time, which is typical therapy, where you go into a clinical space, you sit down and you talk to who is often a woman. That isn't that effective on men. Men benefit not from face-to-face time, shoulder-to-shoulder time, where they're at the gym, lifting weights, they're going for a walk, they're doing sort of a bushcraft stuff, they're, making things, like even just going for a walk. Like, that's the sort of stuff I think is more beneficial to men, especially in a group space, like group therapy sessions. And that, I guess that links back to what I said about men do talk. They just talk in a slightly different way to women in general, and that's totally fine. That doesn't mean they're totally inept emotionally, because they're not. And a conversation between you and your friend who's a firefighter, I think, would have been a testament to that. And it's also like there is a second stage as well. It's like whenever we ask men to talk, but then often we don't extend that to us discussing what men are talking about. And in that sense, in your case, it's like a firefighter's life is so stressful. The things they go through are real, difficult, dangerous. There's probably a high suicide rate within firefighters because of the trauma they experience. And it's not enough for us just to listen to that sort of person. We need to actually act upon what's been said. And in that case, hopefully change the way firefighters are looked after. And not just assume that the beginning and end of the problem and the solution is him talking. It's him talking and then us listening and hopefully changing the system to help him. Yeah,
absolutely, man. Yeah, and one thing that I notice is guys, especially who've been, maybe misled by the approach they think they have to their mental fitness and mental health. There's kind of two ends of the spectrum there. Like when I start working with someone, they'll come to me in this idea of like, oh, this is going to be like this deep therapeutic process. And it's actually like not the case for all guys. I don't think I've tried a bunch of approaches with what I do, and it actually doesn't seem to help most guys that much beyond a certain point. It's almost like you need to verbalize it. And then from what I see, and like this, I could have a very selective control group here, but it seems like you need to talk about it to kind of frame what to do about it and then do something. You've
basically nailed it there. Like that's something Dr. John Barry talks about. He's the founder of the Center for Male Psychology and also the founder of the Men and Boys section of the BPS. And he talks about how the way men view therapy is very different. Like if a man shares a problem, often he just wants a solution. And more often when women talk about problem, they just want to be heard. They don't necessarily want a solution. They want a space to vent and listen to. And both those needs are very real and important, but they're not quite the same. And that's what causes all these arguments where a woman's talking to her husband or boyfriend or whatever about a problem, about work, and he's just there giving solutions. And she's like, I don't want a solution. I just want you to listen. And I was like, that isn't just a meme. I feel like that's how men and women often think. Like women like to share their feelings and be heard and validated. But often men just want a solution. So it's not quite as simple as that. And I would say in that sort of space, if someone is telling you about a problem they have, sometimes you just need to ask, like, are you looking to be listened to, or are you looking for a solution? And they'll tell you, they're like, I know, I just want to rant or just want to vent. Or sometimes they're like, no, I actually want you to suggest something. And I feel like men and women group slightly differently into those two areas. And men more often want an actual solution, and women just want a space to talk. And that's something that John Barry talks a lot about. He was worth looking into more. Actually, he's great.
Yeah, beautiful dude. I'm running up on my time limit, which is such a shame. But is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important to touch on now?
No, I feel like we're squeezing plenty. Only other thing I think is important for us to answer your question again about what change in mindset would have the biggest impact with the smallest amount of effort. And that would be reframing the issue of male suicide out of a mental health issue and into a societal issue. So not seeing suicide in men primarily as a mental health crisis, and seeing it more as the build-up of personal stresses and structural problems. So we talked about a man being abused, 11% of abuse victims attempt suicide. We talked about family courts is another thing. Martin Seeger suggested that around 20% of male suicides in the UK are directly linked to family courts and child custody battles. A lot of male suicides are linked to debt. A lot of it's linked to joblessness. A lot of it's linked to relationship breakdown. And these are all issues. They're not mental health issues. A man who's lost his job and is in debt, that isn't a mental health problem. That's a financial problem. A man who's losing his child isn't experiencing a mental health crisis. He's experiencing the crisis of losing the thing that's most important to him. A man being abused by his wife is not going to solve that by crying about it or talking about it. And that's why I feel like we need to widen our perspective of male suicide. It is obviously a mental health problem as well, but it has a structural cause, a systemic cause, environmental cause, economic causes. There are real issues feeding into it. And I wouldn't be surprised if your firefighter friend has had similar thoughts himself. And I would suggest that isn't a mental health problem. That's a problem of him experiencing highly stressful, traumatizing situations again and again and again for a period of his entire career. And ultimately, most men who are suicidal don't consider themselves as having a mental health problem. They consider themselves as having real systemic problems like the ones I mentioned. So that slight reframing of male suicide, I feel like, is a really good gateway into so many things I talk about. And it requires very little effort and has a massive impact, and hopefully can fundamentally change the way you see the male suicide crisis.
Beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing that. Where can people keep updated and follow your work?
I'm just on Instagram, really. I mean, I'm on Twitter, but Instagram is the main point you want to go to, and it's just at TheTinMen. So TheTinMen, all one word. So yeah, I'm all there. You can get to
go
my
there
Discord.
for quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, go there for very quick. Yeah,
go there for
easy
quick,
to digest,
bite-sized information.
simple
Like you
subjects
can
that
learn about different issues
retweet in a
within
hashtag.
2 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
And every single day, I try to put a post about a different subject. Today, we are talking about domestic violence. Yesterday, it was about violent crime in the cities, and the day before that, it was Ukraine. What's happening to men in Ukraine, and the conscription of men and boys, which is again another invasion of human rights. So yeah, the Tin Men on Instagram, and come join the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, George.
Thanks, mate.
Massively appreciate your time.
No problem. No, thanks for having me on.